An important example of a Bayesian game is an auction. This is a game played between the bidders. One of the big differences between an auction as a Bayesian game and some of the earlier Bayesian games that we've seen is that in an auction, each bidder knows their own valuation, so each bidder has private information. So all the players have private information, unlike the earlier games we saw where one of the players had private information, the others didn't. Now, when you think of an auction, if you're like me, you probably think of something like this. Or if you're a little more sophisticated, maybe this is what you think of.
Is the great Picasso, Nude Green Leaves and Bust, the 1932 Picasso of Marie-Thérèse, showing on my left in the room and on the screen on my right, and as illustrated and described in your catalogues. Lot 6. And $58 million to start this. At $58 million now. At $58 million. At 58 million, 59 million. At 59, 60 million. 61 million. At $61 million. 62 million.
This type of auction is called an English auction. The price starts low and then it starts to rise. You start at some reserve price and then the auctioneer keeps raising the price as long as someone wants to raise the price, and bidders just drop out as the price gets higher. And once there's only one bidder left, they win the auction. Incidentally, the Dutch auction is the reverse, where the price starts high and starts to drop. It's called the Dutch auction because that's how they sell flowers in Holland. Now, these types of auctions are better modeled as dynamic games. Here we're going to study what are called seal bid auctions. That's where all the bidders submit their bids in private to the auctioneer, and the auctioneer determines who wins once they receive everybody's bid. So the way these games proceed is that the bidders simultaneously submit bids. Most importantly, they do so without knowing what the other bidders have bid. Once the bidders have simultaneously submitted their bids, the auctioneer makes a decision as to who wins. The winner of the auction wins the item that's being auctioned and pays the price determined by the rules of the auction. I've left things a little bit vague here. For example, I haven't told you exactly how the auctioneer determines who's going to win. So who wins based on the submitted bids? I haven't told you that. I haven't told you which price the winner pays. And that's because there are different types of auction formats. So here are some auction formats. There are others, but here are a few. The first price auction. Here the auctioneer will pick the bidder who submits the highest bid as the winner. And the winner pays whatever he bids. So that's the most natural thing you would think of when you think of an auction. Another type of auction is called the second price auction. The rule for determining who wins is the same, the highest bid wins. The payment rule is what is different. Here the winner doesn't pay his bid, but rather pays the highest losing bid. In other words, the second highest bid, hence the name second price. Another example of an auction is the average bid auction. Whoever submits the bid that's closest to the average of all the bids wins, and the winner pays their bid. These auction formats can be used for both selling items as well as for procuring items. For example, the average bid auction is typically used for procurement. It's used to make sure that the price doesn't end up too low. It's not so much that the bidder pays, it's kind of the reverse where the winner is paid what they bid because you're bidding for what you want the client to pay. But nonetheless, if we thought of this in the same context of an auction, because they're analogous, you would still think of this as the winner paying what he bid. It turns out that we're not really losing much by looking at these sealed bid auctions rather than the dynamic auctions like the Dutch and English auction. Remember, in the Dutch auction, the price starts high, and the auctioneer keeps dropping the price until someone says, "I'll take it" at that price. It turns out that this is strategically equivalent to the first price auction. In the Dutch auction, at each point in time, there's a decision node. Let's suppose this price starts at 100. There's a decision node. Do you want to raise your hand to buy the item or not? 99. Do you want to buy it or not? 98. Do you want to buy it or not? So a strategy is a complete contingent plan. So for each node, it says whether you raise your hand to buy the item or not. So a strategy in a Dutch auction has to tell you what is the highest price at which you'll raise your hand. That turns out to be what you ought to bid in a first price auction. Similarly, in an English auction, as the price rises, you have to decide, do I want to stay in the auction or do I want to drop out? A strategy would be characterized by a number where you would drop out at that number. At any number higher, you're not going to be in the auction anymore, in an English auction. It turns out that that number is going to be equivalent to what you would want to bid in a second price auction. So these dynamic auctions that we often think of when we think of auctions, like the English and the Dutch auction, are analogous to these sealed bid second price and first price auctions respectively. As an exercise, I'd like you to think about that. You can look up a more precise description of these English and Dutch auctions. If you just Google them, you'll find them. And you'll find that there's this interesting relationship between the first price and the Dutch auction and the second price in the English auction.